Welcome everybody to this meeting of the Transport Committee. Thank you very much everybody who's made it today. I know it's been really quite a difficult start to the day with the roads and transport being clogged with quite a lot of snow overnight, so thank you very much. We've got an agenda in front of us that starts with apologies for absence, and obviously there's some people who have not been able to make it out of the snow.
Yes. So we've had apologies from Amir Hussain, Councillor Butt, Councillor Caffrey, Councillor Clark, Councillor Jones, Councillor Korshik, Councillor Khan, Councillor McLaughlin, and Councillor Caffrey. And I think we are expecting Councillor Rosshaw, who is just not here yet.
Lovely, thank you very much. Any further apologies that we've not noted there? No, lovely. Declarations of disclosable pecuniary interest. Yes.
Just the usual one. I don't think it affects anything today, but spouse working for Atkins. Sorry? My husband works for Atkins. I don't think it affects any of today's, but just in case.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? No? I'm presuming you have that on your register of interest, do you? Yeah. Exempt information. I don't think we have any exempt information this morning, do we?
No.
Not noticed any. Minutes of the meeting of the Transport Committee held on 10th of February. Those are in the papers. And for noting or any amends or anything. Everybody happy? Yes, Councillor Buckley?
At the last meeting, I'm down as present, and I wasn't present.
Exactly, I was going to say exactly the same. You were here in spirit but not in body, obviously, so we'll amend the minutes accordingly. With that amendment, I am really happy that was a correct record of those that meeting. Yes, can I see all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much, that is carried. So the first item is bus service improvement plan update. This is obviously being discussed on a number of occasions, and we've got a few strands to this activity. And Dave, are you wanting to go through this with us?
Yes, I'll introduce it and I'll bring my colleague in. I think as members are aware, at each of these meetings, probably for the last year, we've discussed the bus service improvement plan, and probably will continue to do so, as it's a major sort of programme area now for this committee to manage. At the last meeting, we talked about the Mayor's Big Bus Chat, a big public engagement process that we undertook in sort of late summer into early autumn of last year, and the key findings of that. And the detail of that is now available on our website. What we wanted to do this meeting was to bring forward the passenger charter, because I think one of the key themes that came through from people was wanting a consistent customer service experience when travelling by bus and when dealing with issues around travelling by bus. So we've developed a passenger charter. It was a requirement of the bus service improvement plan. We've developed it with bus operators through the Bus Alliance that Councillor Carlin chairs. So I'm going to introduce my colleague Mick Bunting, who's our head of passenger experience, who's doing the work on this, just to talk us through the passenger charter that we're about to launch. Mick.
Thanks, Dave. Morning, everybody. Mick Bunting, Head of Passenger Experience. So, as Dave said, on the back of the National Bus Strategy, there was a requirement from BSIP for the authority to produce a passenger charter that would set out consistent customer standards, consistent standards that passengers could expect from bus services throughout West Yorkshire. And on the back of the information received from the Mayor's Big Bus Chat through a survey and other online polls and various other ways of communicating with passengers and the wider public, information from that was taken. The post-consultation analysis information was fed into the process of a working group which comprised of our main operators and smaller operators and key members from the Combined Authority to produce a draft report that could then be circulated to accessibility groups and wider stakeholders for consultation, engagement, and to seek that feedback. We took the final draft of the passenger charter to the Bus Alliance in January, and that set out our commitments around accessibility, punctuality, cleanliness, safety and redress for passengers with issues where they may want to complain or indeed give positive feedback to operators and indeed to the Combined Authority, and to set that out clearly, so what those standards could be. That resulted in a final draft of the passenger charter being produced in January, and that is now being designed up for final publication, hopefully by the 20th of this month, 20th of March, once it gets final approval from here and through Bus Alliance on the 15th of March. We've also worked closely with Transport Focus, and Transport Focus have given Combined Authority and operators guidance on good practice, standard templates, on formatting of the passenger charter in accordance with the requirements in the National Bus Strategy and the BSIP. And we've also fed back the final draft into the Transport Focus, who have given us very positive feedback on it. So we're optimistic that this will make a real difference to passengers. So visibility, we're producing a small number of high quality brochures to sit in travel centres throughout West Yorkshire. It will be available in full online in various locations where passengers will be able to find it online. We're doing A1 and A3 posters to be distributed through travel centres throughout West Yorkshire. And from April through the service changes and our roadside display updates, we're going to be putting a QR code to the charter on a rollout basis on all stops and shelters and stations throughout West Yorkshire. So customers have got real accessibility to the charter, what those expectations are and what our pledge is to them, should I say, and importantly how they can get quick accessibility to a complaints procedure and what consistent standards they can expect when doing that. So that will go live from hopefully the end of this month, 20th of March. Hopefully that covers it.
Thank you very much. So just moving to Councillor Carlisle, also you chairing the Bus Alliance has been very much integral to this work. Would you like to, thank you very much first of all for getting us this far, would you like to come with some comments?
Yeah, I can do. I think it's an important part that we've got, and there's a point there I'll bring up. Councillor Wilson brought up last time, having that information about how to complain and what customers can expect at bus stops, and that's a clear point in this and will go up. But really, I think it's just moving towards that standardisation of what customers can expect to see from bus operators and from their bus service anywhere around West Yorkshire, no matter what operator they're on, and they can understand that and see that in one place. And obviously there's that responsibilities that are in there around when your complaints do go to a bus operator over a particular service, how soon they should respond to them and such, and trying to help standardise that process, which I think is really useful. I think one of the keys, this is just a starter really, it goes and it's agreed between the Bus Alliance, which is obviously us and the operators working together as the enhanced partnership, and then we can move on for this and add other details. So any comments on that are obviously more than welcome.
Questions, comments? Councillor Hutchinson? Oh, sorry, I didn't see Councillor Scullion. Councillor Scullion first then. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I actually think the principles are very sound. You know, nobody could argue with the principles, actually. And as Councillor Carroll says, it's a start, and we can improve and develop from this point. I just wanted to say really welcome the idea of standardisation, and to do a bit of special pleading for Calderdale. It's the seventh bullet point on the our pledge to use services and information. Yes, great mobile devices. Not everybody's got mobile devices, and in Calderdale, even if you've got a mobile device, you haven't necessarily got a signal. So you've got no real-time information, electronic information. You've got no printed timetable, and your mobile phone doesn't have a signal at those bus stops. I'm thinking about Cragvale in particular. And QR code is a bit, and Move It, and all those things are useless really. So really welcome the standardisation across the 5 authorities. But actually we do not want to be digitally left behind, actually. So I think that needs to be given some particular attention as we move forward with a number of plans.
Thank you. Councillor Hutchinson?
So similarly, I really applaud the ambitions that are set out in the Charter, but in the report, item 2, clause 2.7, service delivery will be monitored against the Charter, and the Transport Committee will be periodically advised of performance against the standards. A lot of the standards set out in the Charter are very qualitative, and so I would really like to see what format the monitoring would actually take place. And we've said little features later on in the passenger experience, the concerns that reliability is just reported as a global reliability across all days of the week, across all routes and all operators as a lump thing, whereas we know that there are certain services that are particularly affected by reliability issues, and that gets swamped out within the overall reporting. So I would like to see how this charter will be monitored, what the format of the reports back to committee are going to be.
I was going to say exactly the same, actually, Councillor Hutchinson. It's about just looking at this and just see what the KPIs are that can be incorporated into passenger experience, because I can't see it on complaint numbers, for example, and it's that kind of thing that we need to see reported now, isn't it?
It is, whilst we will gather some quantitative information from the various different systems that apply. I mean, the Combined Authority, we do take some complaints and issues from about bus services, some of which we refer on to the bus operators, and we'll gather some quantitative information around that complaint handling. The qualitative that Councillor Hutchinson relates to, what we do is work closely with Transport Focus, who do and have been actually actively doing it over the last couple of months, a national survey of attitudes towards bus services as part of our monitoring evaluation of the bus service improvement plan and our bus strategy. We actually pay for an enhanced sample size for that survey, so that we get a better picture for West Yorkshire of the qualitative attitudinal aspects of that. It's not particularly good at breaking that down necessarily to areas, but what it does do quite well is actually gives us comparators with other similar areas like Manchester and South Yorkshire. So it'll give us a sort of how our customers are feeling type of feedback. And I think, as we have put in the passenger experience report at various different times, we also do some localised surveys on attitudes, but it doesn't perhaps get necessarily to the absolute level of "were you happy with your complaint" type of thing, and that might be something that Mick and I need to take back, I think, in terms of after sales, if you want, on people who have raised issues. Often, issues around bus services can be as sort of specific as, my bus at 10 past didn't turn up, but there can also be, particularly these days, concerns about the adequacy of the service overall. So to a certain extent, those latter ones are a different type of thing to evaluate than the service performance ones.
So perhaps if Councillor Carlow, in his role as chair of the Bus Alliance, can work with you, Dave, just to say, going forward, about what the KPIs should be as part. We don't want to do a separate report, so as part of the passenger experience report, if we have something incorporated within that. And I think my thing with, I love data, and I think, but over time, it's best we can keep those stats sort of constant, so we can see improvements, etc. So if we can take that as an action. I just want also, Dave, whilst you're speaking, can you just come back on Councillor Scullion's point about accessibility of information?
Yes, I think one of the consequences of the pandemic is that before the pandemic we were posting bus stop timetables on every single bus stop for 14,000 in West Yorkshire. That became very, very challenging when bus services were changing all the time, and to some extent they still are a bit. And so we've been focusing on the busier bus stops. I think Councillor Scullion's point, and I did write it down actually, is that perhaps one of the things we do need to do is prioritise some of the places like Cragvale and those places where we know actually there's no mobile signal, and just to make sure that we find ways of making people in those communities aware of when their buses travel from, and maybe that's something I can take away and think about whether or not it's simply just putting something on the bus stop, or there are other ways in which you do that. But I think it's a good point that we have over years moved more to digital means, and there's lots and lots of advantages of doing that. But we are mindful of the fact that we've got to that's not a universal sort of coverage for that.
Thank you. So now I'm going to take a few people all at once now, just to make sure we can keep the meeting going, because obviously we've got a lot to get through now. I've got 6 people now waiting to indicate. Councillor Bolt, did you sort of winked at me? I'm not quite sure if that was you didn't put your hand up, so I'm not quite sure what that was. Excellent. Councillor Bolt, I think you're definitely next in that case.
Thank you, Chair. And if it's not a kiss of death to Jane's future political hopes, I'd like to say I agree with a lot of what Councillor Scullion said. And it's not just the accessibility at certain locations. When you look through the Charter, there is a heavy reliance on IT and mobile access, which for a lot of passengers and the ones that we're seeking to return, they may not have either that at a place or that at a bus stop. Yeah, we assume everybody has got modern phones, but I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who are quite happy with the old Nokias that actually just made a phone call. So I think we should look at that. Comment has been made about approval process here and then the Bus Alliance, and I'd like some clarity on where the final decision for the Charter makes, because the point in point 9 about external consultees, there is a gap that the users and people who volunteered on what used to be called the district consultation subcommittees in Kirklees haven't had that opportunity because they haven't had a meeting. So we should be seeking the volunteers who have come forward and offered to help us. We should be getting their input to it. So external consultees, I think, if we could look at putting something in about subject to comments, or if there is a way that we can include any comments, because we are told that we're going to get a district meeting in Kirklees at some time. In fact, we're getting 2. It's like buses, they're going to come along one after the other. But looking to the Charter, a couple of things in this, and it's ironic, I mean, I've raised issues when new stops have been put up on an exposed location in Murfield that, no, you can't have a shelter. But it says, got an issue with a bus stop or shelter, you can let the authority know. Well, yes, you can, but that's not to say anything will change when you do. And again, the way that you let the authority know is by a web link. Yeah, we should be looking at making sure we are accessible and inclusive. So, old-fashioned telephone numbers work for a lot of people. The reliability section, and I notice, the complaints and comments, to jump to that, it says contact details for operators can be found on pages 3 and 4. The Charter itself is a 3-page document, and there is no contact details within the Charter that we've got today of anything like that. So I don't know where pages 4 is of this. It just says this page is left intentionally blank. So if we could make sure that the document is actually complete. The reliability, reliable and punctual bus service. Buses should run. If we're setting up a Charter, should is a bit woolly. And how are we going to impose any sanctions should we need to do? If we are setting something, you say they will run, and if you exceed, and it's like, when trains exceed certain time gaps at getting into stations, passengers can claim a refund. Will there be anything like that for bus operators? If your bus is late, getting you in your destination above a certain time, can you claim it? Because, again, that's in the satisfaction guarantee. If you're not happy with your bus journey, and again, that's a wide parameter, what are actually, voucher claims and taxi refunds, again, see the web. What are the criteria under which somebody who's not happy with a journey can claim a voucher? I've raised before that we have the last journey promise, but in some cases, it's any journey. In cases where people are coming to work, if a bus is 3/4 of an hour late, meaning that they are either going to have problems at work or it then affects the rest of their working schedule, we should have that facility to make sure that they can get to and from. And yeah, we've talked about the review will be annually. On the date at the top of this document, again referring back to the charter, there isn't actually a date on this or anything like that. I would suggest that this committee reviews after 6 months. We've talked about putting KPIs and things like that. Running 12 months hence doesn't actually give us an inkling of how it's working and if we need to tweak it for passenger satisfaction. So, as was said, the principle is okay, but putting it into practice, I think we are to make sure that we are giving our passengers a proper service and making sure bus operators are compliant. We need to tighten up on a few of these things.
My understanding is we're approving it today, is the recommendation. Don't come back on it yet, Dave. And obviously there does need to be a review. 6 months I'm not sure is enough time, to be quite honest, to look at KPIs over a period of time. But anyway, we'll come back to that. I just want to go through a few more councillors first before we bring officers back in. So Councillor Wilson was next, then Councillor Thompson and Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. Really pleased to see that we're going to be putting in how to complain information at the bus stops. Something, as you said, Councillor Carlo, I asked about before, and I'm definitely going to claim credit for that little win. I think that will help us get a much truer picture of what service is like, because I don't think most people know how to complain. Picking up on an earlier point as well around accessibility of information, I'd like it if there was a way to. I think we need to look at how it would make it easier to complain as well. So hopefully it's not just cumbersome web forms, but whether there's sort of an easy to text number or something like that, you know, something that doesn't rely on kind of navigating web pages. So I don't know if that's available now, but if it is, great, we can add it to the information. If it's not, I think we should look at getting something like that set up. In terms of the how to complain information design, I hope that it's as big and bold as possible and eye-catching, and people might feel like it's not worth complaining because, you know, will that make a difference? So making sure it's really clear that when people complain, it does make a difference, because A, but operators have to give them vouchers and so on, so it's an incentive for them to be better, and B, it gives us better data about where improvements need to be made. So yeah, really pleased about that. Just one additional question about the bus service improvement plan, about the passenger charter. I think it's a vision as well as a commitment, isn't it? And I think a lot of what will make that a reality is some of the stuff we're doing in terms of putting in bus priority gates, in terms of simpler and cheaper fares. So I see a lot that we're doing at the West Yorkshire level as public offices. But can we get, as well as key performance indicators, a clear plan from the bus operators about how they intend to improve to meet the gap between the charter and the reality of what they're doing? So not just general commitments, but I'd like to see, you know, a business plan. How is it they intend to reach this level of service and to make those improvements, which shouldn't be a problem because that is how they will grow their business as well. And I assume they want to grow their business. And as I've said before, I want to see, you know, where is their growth model? I want to see a growth model from these private operators, as well as us as the public sector, making improvements that benefit them and our passengers. Thank you.
So I'll bring Councillor Carlo when we've heard from a few more people on that. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. Just, yeah, the importance of complaints being responded to, because repeatedly we're being told that they're not, and that people aren't hearing back from their enquiries as well. And yeah, the importance of accurate data. The main complaints I'm getting at the moment are buses being cancelled and not being notified. So yesterday somebody was waiting almost an hour in the city centre in the snow, not knowing whether a bus was coming or not, because the time showed that they could tell there was something up. So whether it was the predictive system or whether it was the failure of the operator to report the cancellation, they didn't know what was happening. And that seems to be people are happier knowing their bus isn't going to come so they can wait at home rather than waiting in uncertainty. But I do value the work that is going on to improve that. But just if we can give a nudge for the simpler things like reporting cancellations, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, we probably need a bit of more of a deep dive actually on complaints and how they're handled, and if the Bus Alliance perhaps could look at that, Councillor Cahill. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. I feel this is rather a surreal conversation, actually, because here we are talking about a charter, and I represent a ward which is 6 miles from Leeds city centre. And in the last year or two, we've lost the X7, the 48, which has just been cancelled, and the 7S on Shadwell Lane must be the worst service in England. And First Bus, who came to a meeting the other night, said, oh, well, yes, we're attending to all these matters and blah, blah, blah. And of course, people are voting with their feet. They're just not catching these services. And of course, the 48, he said, well, it's lack of patronage. Well, it is, because it doesn't come, and therefore people don't get it, and there we are, it gets cancelled. And on page 22 of this, of the papers, it mentions walking and cycling again. People are sick and tired of hearing the phrase walking and cycling. All they want to do, can you imagine this morning, walking and cycling? They want to get to the bus stop. They want to get to the bus stop and catch the bus. And on page 19, there's reference to the package will also deliver environmental improvements to bus stations and stops, such as solar panels on green roofs. Whoopee-doo. Can we have some more buses, please? And finally, the charter, we pledge to meet the commitments set out in this charter. What happens if we don't?
So I think Councillor Wilson mentioned earlier that obviously there needs to be a conversation with operators about what their contribution to achieving this vision is, actually, which is absolutely right. It's not just a charter, it is a vision of what we want to achieve, but we cannot do this alone. We do not control all the buses and all the operators in the region, I'm afraid, and therefore, whilst we are members who represent residents who are very frustrated with bus services, this is what our challenge is to the operators about what we'd like to see and what we expect on behalf of our passengers. I've now got Councillor Firth, and then I've got Councillor Swift, who's in waiting very personally.
I'll be brief, Chair. There's just one little item that I've spotted. It's the last journey promise. And it just tells me that if somebody's gone to work and they've got a lot of money in their pocket and they've got the bus pass, but no bus. I just wondered whether it'd be possible to turn this round. Instead of somebody, they might not have any money to book a taxi, whether we could have a preferred operator to the bus companies, and that preferred operator invoice the bus company for a service missed. The taxi operator, private hire operator, whatever, they invoice the taxi, the bus company for service missed. So that person does not need to worry about, well, I dare ring one because I've no money, you know? I don't know whether it would be possible, David, but I think it's an idea that we should consider at the very least.
Thank you. Councillor Firth, Councillor Swift.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is, as people have previously said, an achievement that we've got this far. I think it obviously should be approved, but I do think it should be seen as a basis for moving forward. I think some of the things colleagues have mentioned are probably better dealt with within the bus service improvement plan. I think this is about the things that happen on the interface between the passenger and the bus. I think there are shortcomings in it which are not going to get picked up by the monitoring, because we're going to be monitoring the things that are in it. It's a bit thin, for instance, about safety issues. It's a bit thin about when there's incidents on buses, which is a major area of passenger concern. It doesn't seem to say too much about what the driver will do if things go wrong. It doesn't talk about who calls the police, do you do it, or does the driver call, etc. I think that it's a bit low as well in terms of safety and antisocial behaviour in bus stations. And I do think that the operators could do more to actually physically oversee what's happening in bus stations to avoid the kind of problems that passengers encounter. But I think these are things for a review of the Charter, and I do agree, probably 12 months rather than 6. But it's not quite the same thing as the monitoring and the KPIs, because the KPIs are going to be about whether they're achieving the things that are actually in it, as opposed to things that are not. So that's, anyway, with those comments, very happy to thank everybody who's been involved in getting us so far.
Thank you, Councillor Swift. So I think that was some really rich feedback there, actually, and some very good comments. I'm going to go first of all to Councillor Carlisle, then I'm going to come to Mick Bunting, just to come up with some of the more technical side of the feedback to answer those questions.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, and I can come back on a few of those. I can sympathise with Councillor Buckley because I represent a ward 7 miles out of the city centre, so I can go one better for you there. And I've had the announcement this week that a number of my services will be removed. Now, the comments you make, they would have been incredibly helpful in 1980 when we could have immediately acted on the local authority run service and changed the way that service operates. As you well know, the bus services are privately operated and commercial decisions can be made by operators to remove a service as and when they wish. The combined authority then steps in where it can with those, but it is getting increasingly more difficult on the finite budget that the local authorities have to replace those services as they come. And that is the real difficulty I think we're in when the patronage numbers are where they are now. In order to try and grow those up, we've got a real difficulty, haven't we, if commercial operators are choosing to withdraw services while we're trying to grow passengers. The important bit on this, though, taking into account the charter, it's important to note this charter comes to us from the Bus Alliance, so it comes from the partnership of us and the operators. It is written by the operators themselves in effect, and is what their promise is to us, as well as the passengers that they serve. So I think that's an important distinction with this. This is the bus operators saying this is what we're going to stick to and what we have agreed to stick to across West Yorkshire, which I think is then really valuable. It's not something that we've written in terms of then enforcing on them. Obviously the monitoring is something we can then do, and we are judging operators by the levels they have set themselves, which I think is very valuable and will allow us to go a lot stronger on that. I guess that's where some of the points such as should run come into it, because we absolutely know that 95% of buses should run on time and should run at all. But unfortunately we're not at that level at the moment, and we want to get to that level. It is getting better, and the report that we've got later will show that's improved. But I think that's why that encouragement is there, rather than it being a will run. It's not us enforcing something on them, because to be honest, we don't necessarily have that power at all times. But this is the operators saying themselves that they are signed up to the same ambitions as us, which I think is a positive way forward. So this effectively is that voice of the partnership. There will be some really interesting information coming back around the complaints, and hopefully taking on board the comments around how we get that information to judge how well and how effectively this has been followed. We'll have conversations around the Bus Alliance of the kind of information operators are happy to share around their complaints, about the information that comes in, and I'm really looking forward to the fact that they signed up to this, so it is an agreement that they will be supplying the information that allows us to monitor them on this, which I think is a really good step forward.
Thank you, that's encouraging. Mick Bunting?
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and cover the points raised as best I can to give some reassurance. We've already got quarterly meetings with the working group in the diary to work on the customer charter, passenger charter going forward, and that will feed into a richer picture at the formal 12-month review, feeding into this forum, and that in that, we're looking to more clearly define our KPIs so that we can do some clear performance management and monitoring of the services that are in there. So things like monitoring complaints, numbers of complaints, categorising them, bus safety, which we've got through our Safer Travel Partnership in terms of recruitment of PCSOs that's coming out of the BSIP to manage that area of bus station safety, passenger safety on buses, and also the Safeguarding Forum, which manages and monitors all safeguarding incidents on buses and bus stations, which is ongoing at the moment. And that will be, as well as the qualitative stuff, we'll get the quantitative stuff out of that as well. So that those KPIs will be more clearly defined going forward. And this is a first start. This, I think we're all agreed that this is a commitment and a pledge at the moment, but it's an emerging document that will get real substance going forward, and that's our aim. In terms of the point about Calderdale, which I think is a really good point about the digital by default approach, I can assure you that equality, inclusion, diversion is considered in all decisions, and through COVID we're now doing a wider rollout of roadside displays to ensure that all means of communication are accessible to all. And perhaps if we have an offline discussion, councillor, I can make sure that my teams have got cognizance of those areas that are in real need. In terms of the layout, councillor Bolt, I think it's a good point. The purpose of the document in the papers is really to show you the content, the substantive content of the document. The layout has changed several times as a result of it going to design, and therefore page numbers and errors such as that may be evident in these papers, but will be ironed out in the actual design going forward. But it's a good point. And I think the point about the telephone numbers and making sure all people have got access to the complaints procedures and other services is something that we'll take on board, and thank you for that feedback. And I think that's anything else
Lovely.
needs to be covered off.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dave, did you want to?
Yeah, I think Councillor Carlin and Mick's so covered up the points. One or two things from me. I think we're trying to pitch something that the customer can understand and work with, and not to be an overly legalistic or bureaucratic document. I think we're just trying to find the balance in that, in terms of that. But I think what's coming over from comments is that probably sitting behind that needs to be something a little bit stronger, and I think that's something we can take away and look at with the Bus Alliance. I think the other thing, just in terms of and Mick and I will make sure it's probably covered in the final version. You know, we have a telephone contact centre that we run called Metroline. If somebody wants to report a damaged bus shelter or anything really, you know, people can phone us. We do have that. It's on every bus stop number. Perhaps there's a bit of a learning point after this conversation that maybe we need to strengthen the awareness of that. But yes, by all means, we'll monitor this. I think this is a really good start in terms of essentially getting lots of independent businesses to agree to do things the same way, and I think that's a starting point of something that can go a lot further. So lots of really good feedback, and we'll take Councillor Swift's points, because I think there is a separate piece of work around safety and security that, as Mick said, we're doing some work with the police. We'll probably bring that back probably in a couple of meetings' time to this committee in terms of what we're doing. And I think the point Councillor Swift makes is a good one, in the sense of that needs a sort of public face to it as well.
And of course the BSIP does enable us to have some PCSOs on buses, doesn't it, which will help with that very point, Councillor Swift. So thank you everybody for that. I think just...
I did.
I was just going to come up with that.
It's an interesting one, that. By all means, we'll take that back to the bus operators as a suggestion. In some respects, that's supposed to be there as a real disincentive to them to cancel the last bus, because and actually when we last asked them, they hadn't actually made many taxi refunds, because the idea is to make sure those last buses run and they run on time, because that's really the stick is the paying for taxis. But having said that, I think there's a good point in saying, well, actually, if you need a taxi, yeah.
So I'm going to bring that as an action to the end.
Yeah,
so
we'll take
so
take that back to the
yeah.
bus line.
So a few things. First of all, obviously we recommend it to approve this, and I think we should, because of course there's nothing at the moment. This is a really good start at getting us to a place where we want to go. We want to make sure that customers rightly have a standard of travel that they can expect when they go on buses in West Yorkshire. So I would recommend that we do this with a 12-month review, so that some of those KPIs that Councillor Hutchison talked about before, we've got substantial information really to see how it's going. We do need to see accessibility of how to complain amongst, so it's not just on an app. It needs to be very accessible, notwithstanding that analogue phones are going to go in 2025, so let's all be aware of that. KPI document needs to come out of this to be incorporated in the passenger experience, so we know exactly how it's going and what needs to be improved for that 12-month review. It sounds like review points are already in throughout the year, which will leave Councillor Carroll to do. Yes, if we can this is operators' contribution, as you said, isn't it? This is what they say they're going to do, so let's hold them to that, because that's what we want to see. And I do think there's something on the taxi stuff. There may be a reason why there's not many claims, because it's just so blooming complicated to do that they don't do it. So if there was some mechanism, perhaps we could just look into that, reply to Councillor Firth offline, so that has been properly investigated as an option going forward. Is there anything else, Councillor Carroll, you want to say before we go to move to recommendation? Okay, in that case, I'm happy to recommend this. Can I see Councillor Bolt?
Thanks, Chair. I did mention the fact that Kirklees passengers haven't had the consultation. So could I ask that we have an addendum to the recommendation, subject to the consideration of comments from the Kirklees District Committee, or whatever we call it these days?
So I'm sure we can't delay this, Councillor Bolt. It really has to happen now, because people out there are saying, how do I complain? And it's just not there. So obviously I would like to think that in the development of this, the consultation has been done and that consultation is going to be ongoing. Is that right, Councillor Callum McBunting?
Yeah, obviously not all of those meetings have happened and they weren't taking place through some of the time. We've been there as there's officers from the districts there. There's myself there as chair of the Alliance, and there's obviously several officers from the Combined Authority that have been feeding in as much as they can of the information they'd want. I think in terms of what's there, I'm keen that we take this as a starter, because I don't think anyone would disagree with the information that's down there of what we want to see improvements in, and then we'll continue rolling that forward on the programme. Would be my my preference.
So if this can be an item on the next agenda of the Kirklees bus forum, I think that would be helpful, because then that would feed into all the constant review that we're doing. Councillor Firth?
Just to support you, Chair, this document is not set in stone. It will be constantly under review, so comments from all our district can be added at some stage going forward.
We just need to get on with some stuff and make sure that people have the bus services they deserve. So I've recommended that, and Councillor Carroll seconded that. Can I see all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much. That is carried.
Can I record my abstention based on concerns that are expressed at the lack of formal consultation with Kirklees, please?
Absolutely, but obviously also understand that no decision sometimes is a very bad decision. I believe that we're here to make decisions to move things forward, and this document moves things forward, notwithstanding there's still improvements to be made and still amendments to be made as we go forward. So thank you very much, everybody. Now we're continuing with the debate really, because we've got a passenger experience update as the next item on the agenda. Dave, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, I'll introduce it. I mean, I think as you're familiar with now, we bring this report to you every other meeting as a sort of state of where the public transport network is at any particular point. So there's lots of detail in here, and I'm happy to address and answer questions on it. So I'm not going to talk you through the entire report. I would just like to sort of pull two things out really. One around rail services first, and I think that the key things in here is that the report sort of identifies that whilst performance has probably levelled out a little bit, it's still levelled out at a lower level than would be desirable, and there's still particular problems around Transpennine Express and the Huddersfield line in terms of punctuality, cancellations and overcrowding at times because of the cancellations. So I think we're well aware of the the concerns. I know Councillor Kouchik and I met with TransPennine Express a couple of weeks ago, as has the Mayor, and the Mayor has and other mayors have met with the Secretary of State. So I think it's well documented concerns around TransPennine Express. The paper also summarises how timetables and routes will change in May. May being one of the two rail timetable changes of the year, and I think it is quite disappointing that the Huddersfield Wakefield Castleford service has had a very checkered history over the last couple of years, and will be operated as bus substitution from May till December. But from December onwards, we're reliably informed that TransPennine Express will run a service along that route and extend it on to York. So I think the solution's there, but it's a painful step towards it. I think there's also the May timetable addresses the very short number of journeys between Huddersfield and Dewsbury in the evening peak. That I know Councillor Firth has been lobbying very strongly to TransPennine Express on that. So hopefully that's a fix to a problem which arguably shouldn't have happened in the first place. But I think that's broadly where we are on the rail side. On the bus side, I think we've touched on this a little bit in the previous item, but I'll sort of talk you through where things are at the moment. I think in terms of patronage, both on rail and bus, I think patronage is all levelled off to a sort of level that we can see now, sort of coming out of the pandemic, as being in the sort of low 80% of what it was before, and I think that's probably what we're dealing with now. So I think that's sort of telling. I think punctuality and reliability, again, like rail, it hasn't perhaps deteriorated since we last looked at this, but it hasn't got much better either. So I think there's still some particular challenges around that. I think we're still seeing some impact of driver shortages for the bus operators, and we're also seeing some fairly significant traffic congestion issues now that are impacting on bus services. So some of it is down to sort of operators, some of it's down to traffic conditions. I think the other main thing to bring you up to speed with really is bus services are still operating under some special funding arrangements. Government has, I think we've seen in the paper, and you probably picked up in other briefings and on the media, government have extended their bus funding until the end of June. And so the sort of cliff edge, as it were, of funding that we're expecting at the end of this month has been moved back 3 months. So that doesn't really change the situation. It just extends it a little. We will watch with interest, and I'm sure you will as well, the budget next week, because if there's some indication of some ongoing longer-term funding for bus in there, then obviously we'll need to see how we work with that. If there isn't anything in the budget announcement around bus, then I think we can reliably assume that the end of June funding is the end of the funding, and we'll need to work through the consequences of that. In the meantime, first in West Yorkshire, and predominantly in the Leeds area, and to a certain extent in some other areas, are making some changes to bus services at the end of the month. I think Councillor Buckley and Councillor Carlisle have already referred to some of them, and so that's a situation where the company are essentially seeking to move resource from some of the lesser used services onto the to step up frequencies back on some of the better used services. Now that's the strategy that they've expressed in meetings with Councillor Carlisle and I. But I think it's Councillor Buckley and Councillor Carlisle have already identified that's leading to withdrawal of services for some communities, and obviously the impact on those communities, and the the capacity of the combined authority to fix that is limited. So to a certain extent, those communities are going to be impacted, and I think it's a fair point that's been made in terms of we do, in terms of previous conversation and the bus service improvement plan, we need to find ways of actually turning that situation around. Finally, on 2.13 on the report regarding buses, there's a reference to some changes of Arriva who are planning to make in East Leeds. That's been deferred for now, and at the time of writing, that was our understanding. But again, Councillor Cowell and I have met with Arriva, and so reliably sort of informed that those changes will happen, but a complication had arisen. So I'll stop there.
Thank you.
And sure there's lots of things that people can ask.
Thank you. So buses and trains. Councillor Cowell, you had your hand up early there.
Thanks. I was just going to add a bit more detail because I know that the questions around different service changes are ones that many members have asked. Dave obviously alluded to a number of them there. So yes, point 2.12 on the report notes those bus services that have been removed, and I'm very aware of them due to the fact that the majority of those are in Leeds, and the majority of services in fact impact residents of my area. I think one of the things I'm most dismayed about, and I think Leeds in its ambitions, is that quite a lot of those are the community connections between different communities of Leeds rather than just buses into the city centre. You know, they're the only connection between neighbouring towns or for people to their nearest shop or such, and that's a shame because that's the kind of routes that I know West Yorkshire and Leeds has an ambition to see more of. What I will say is that those services are still being worked on by officers at the Combined Authority who, now that they've been registered and are public, they can have discussions with First and other operators around returning those connections. So we'll continue to do that. In essence, though, I must say I do have some sympathy with the operators at the moment on this. Not necessarily on the choices that they've made, but they are their commercial choice to make. And as private companies, they do need that certainty in order to plan their business. And once again, we've had that very short notice announcement of funding of extension. So I've been dealing with the same situation now since July when I took over this role, of that cliff edge always being this thing that's being hanging over us in 2 months' time. Now, obviously, we've reported on numbers, I think, of routes that are at risk. I think people can take a note that those routes are at risk now in June rather than in April when they were before. We don't necessarily expect that these extensions will go on forever, and that's not necessarily the best thing for operators. So we are hopeful that in the budget there is a chance to put some long-term funding in terms of bus to try and save these routes. Otherwise we will see significant other routes go by the wayside in the summer months. So really this is just a stay of execution, and we will wait to see, and obviously the Mayor has written to inform of what we would like to see in the budget in terms of bus services and other transport ones. So we'll wait to see what happens in that.
And obviously what we're pushing for with the Mayor is a London-style settlement really on buses across the region. We all know that for buses to run and to be servicing all communities, they do need subsidy, I'm afraid. Particularly, obviously, since the pandemic, these numbers are still not back to 100% of what the baseline was. So there's a financial reality here that we all need to be aware of. And this extension, sort of month by month almost, hand to mouth, is no good for planning a bus system. And you know, all the work that we had to do, actually, and it literally was the 11th hour, wasn't it, when they said they were going to extend it another 3 months. It's an incredible, really, way to fund a public transport system from government. Councillor Firth.
Thank you, Chair. David has touched on it about the reinstatement of those 2 peak time trains that from Huddersfield are now stopping in Dewsbury. But I just want to express my thanks, basically, to officers from WACA, from Kirklees officers, yourselves and colleagues, and not least the Mayor, for making enough noise to make TransPennine consider and to reintroduce these two really important services in our town. They do listen eventually, if we make enough noise. But thank you, David. I'm sure you've had some input as well. And that's all to say, but I'm delighted, absolutely delighted for the people, not just the communities, but the great number of pupils that do attend Munich College from our part of the world and have to get home again. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and obviously we hope to see that service improve even further actually going forward. And similarly, the other service that we've been talking about in Bradford quite a lot is the Bradford Foster Square Ilkley-Skipton service, which has now been reduced during the daytime. And again, I'm pushing to make sure that they think about improving that from December onwards to try and get more trains on that as well, because it is a service that we're relying very much within districts and obviously in neighbouring districts as well to really service that Aire Valley corridor. Councillor Hutchinson, I've got it.
Thank you, Chair. While expressing relief at that some of the more damaging service reductions that have been proposed have been at least put on hold, I would like to ask whether there's any proactive work that could be done to try and increase the fare box take on those services that are particularly, that we know are likely to be under threat if subsidy doesn't return. So far, it's been suggested we don't flag up these potential risks with those service users, but I would suggest that the message that if you don't use it, you lose it, would be worth getting out to those communities that are potentially affected. Regarding driver shortages for bus operating companies, the report says that staff shortages are easing, and certainly the local managers for First Bus have confirmed that they are up to staffing level for drivers in our region. So can we anticipate that reliability will now improve beyond those levels that are reported? And then on the rail services, I'm very pleased to see the restoration of an hourly service through Leeds, Bradford, Halifax to Manchester. That's very welcome. But services through Brickhouse Station remains very poorly served on Sundays, but also the early morning service. The earliest train from Brickhouse to Manchester doesn't get into Manchester until 8 minutes to 8, which is too late for a lot of people's needs. And the last train to Brickhouse leaves Manchester at half past 9 in the evening. Considering rerouting some of the trains that run through from Leeds to Wigan through Brickhouse could alleviate some of those deficiencies in the timetable, and I would hope that could be looked at. Brickhouse needs better services for the population that it serves.
Thank you. I'm going to take a few comments, then come back to officers. We've got Councillor Swift next, I think.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, buses, Chair. Not too much from a Wakefield perspective, because Arriva jumped the gun and did their cuts, although still taking the money as far as I know, and did their cuts in advance. So with just a little bit of kind of reservation and caution as to what happens when the government money runs out after the local elections, not being cynical, of course. I think the main issue on the buses, from our perspective, and I think probably from most people's, is the reliability, because reliability is the key to actually getting the passenger numbers up. At the moment, people are using the buses if they have to, and no more than that, simply because of the reliability factor, which is still very, very bad. On the trains, I think we're talking, or I'm talking, about a failure of the machinery to coordinate and to oversee the trains. Somewhere between the stools of the various operators, the DTI and the other people, they've managed to lose the Wakefield-Huddersfield service. It's not been cut back through any particular intention or any misguided prioritisation of the service. It's simply been a failure of the actual machinery of coordination. The service had suffered because Northern treated it as did deprioritise it, and when they'd got problems of rolling stock 2 or 3 years ago, when the new stuff, the 195 trains, weren't coming through fast enough, and they were obviously having to dump the Pacers because of everything we know, they were short of stock. That Huddersfield, Wakefield, Castleford service was one that took the hit. Okay, not good. We were very much looking forward to the prospects of not only restoration of a full service, but also something very good indeed of that service being extended to York, with various employment issues benefited from. Now, I think this is what brings us to where the system failed, and we know most of it. The report's fairly full. I support everything in that report. It's set out there in paragraphs 2, 17, 18 and 19 quite fully. Is that, okay, making use to some extent of the heavy investment at Castleford Station, extra platform, lift, etc., very good, together with some spin-off from the TransPennine diversions. We were looking forward to having that service to Huddersfield fully restored. So, TransPennine, okay, perhaps to nobody's surprise, and with all the difficulties elsewhere, it might have been thought a brave move on TransPennine's part to say they would do it from May. A lot of us in Wakefield weren't expecting it from May, but TransPennine first of all said they could do it, and then later said they couldn't. Then Northern said, well, we're sorry, we're no longer in a position to do it. We thought it was going to get done by TransPennine. Now, one can understand to some degree and sympathise with the position of both operators, but who the hell is doing the coordination on this? I question where Network Rail are, because somewhere in the middle of it, they've actually switched the allocation of the paths, making it extra difficult for anybody to pick up when TransPennine said they couldn't. I question Network Rail. I question the role of the Department for Transport, and certainly Northern. The briefings that Northern have given to the user groups actually suggest that the Department for Transport instructed them not to take up the service. That's what Northern have said anyway. And I think we've got to question just how effective, the Rail North Partnership has been in this. So the government have said, for all the reasons we understand, and I think this issue illustrates it up to the eyeballs, the government said they wanted this great British Railways bringing in. It's now over 2 years since the William Shapps report that said it's not that complicated a thing they want to bring back in. It's basically going to involve transfer of staff from Department of Transport to do a job that was previously done by the old Strategic Rail Authority, and still nothing's happening on it. And that coordination, so that there's somebody who says, we want this service to run here, we want that service to run there, the lack of that coordination, shown up in this instance, where we've simply had a service between two quite significant towns that has just kind of fallen between the cracks. We very much hope it will be reinstated and enhanced from December. And as I say, fully support everything in that report, fully support everything that people are trying to do at the moment, but certainly what has happened should not have happened. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, it's that guiding mind, isn't it, of the railway that was very much behind the Great British Railway concept, and I think we're still very supportive of it. But it does need to happen. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually unusually going to start by saying thank you I have never seen such happy faces at a bus stop as I did on Monday morning with the 966, and rarely have I seen such a happy driver who seems absolutely perfect for the job. So a huge thank you to all the officers and everybody who made it possible for us to have the 966 back. It frankly felt like a miracle. Also, thank you to the Chair and the Mayor for pushing on the Bradford Ilkley service, as we are the only station on that line that's in Leeds, and for protecting the school services, which is really, really important. I know that I've had some communications from Baildon that I've shared with you as well, and I know you're working with them because they feel particularly vulnerable when this changes. But thank you for the work you have to protect what we have. And yeah, again, to reiterate the fears over long-term cuts and the impact of those. Thankfully, as our area has actually been spared this time of the worst of it, but just how do we push to engage with operators to make sure that where they are cutting routes, that the impact is minimised? Certainly with our area, they're looking to tweak bits here and there, but if we can engage to make that, to minimise the detriment of it, if it has to happen in the longer term, that would be good. And again, to reiterate the issues with reliability and cancellations of buses and the appalling information that customers are receiving. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. I'm going to bring Dave in because he's got to go in 10 minutes' time. But just before I do, obviously if Councillor Korshik was here, she would very much talk about TransPennine Express and how the services across the Pennines are still not what they should be, and that the Mayor and myself had conversations with Steve Montgomery and with Rail North Partnership about how that can be improved. Just want all parties to get together really and solve that for the sake of the customer as soon as possible. There are people waiting on platforms, there are people not being able to get to work, and really everybody needs to be minded about the impact that's having on people's daily lives. Dave, do you want to come back on the comments and the questions you've had there?
Yes, I think Councillor Swift gives a very good explanation of the saga there. I think the only thing I would add to that, and I think Councillor Hinckley, if you're aware of this as well, is that I think underlying the situation in the rail is a scrutiny on cost that you can see sort of sitting underneath some of the DFT's sort of positioning here. I think that's something which we will need in terms of it going forward, to be mindful of the fact that that our region should not be disadvantaged because of sort of fairly narrow a narrow view on cost that doesn't actually look at the fact that passenger revenues in this region are quite strong. I think on the bus points and Councillor Thompson's points, and I will take the thanks back to it's not me, it's the team who found a fairly creative solution to that point. I think and then Councillor Hutchinson's made this point as well. We should be seeing improvements in reliability as the driver's situation eases. Traffic conditions are still a factor, but the sort of cancellation due to driver shortages, we've got to be very much on the case of operators to actually address that, because that's what we're experiencing quite a lot of at the moment. I think the other thing I'd say both to Councillor Thompson and Councillor Hutchinson's points there is not unhelpfully, the bus operators have actually signalled the sort of things that they would be doing if the funding comes to an end. So to a certain extent, it gives us an opportunity through our officers and talking to their sort of middle management people as well, to at least have those discussions about how you mitigate a bad situation, even if we can't prevent everything happening. We usually sometimes sitting down and thinking, well, actually, if you do X instead of Y, then it won't be quite as bad. And I think that is the benefit we've got from a bit of a stay of execution in this particular case.
So, any further questions of Dave before he goes? No. Any further comments or questions on this report? Councillor Bolt.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And just picking up on points that colleagues have made, we've got comments in the section where it talks about bus stations. Perhaps in future reports we could also look at implications and hopefully improvements from rail stations, because as Kevin has mentioned, with investment in Castleford, Unfortunately, the problems with the trains means that people from Murfield can't get to Castleford or Wakefield Kirkgate, but again, Wakefield Kirkgate's had an improvement, and we should be looking on what the passenger experience and hopefully passenger numbers have done, where this authority and others have been involved in improving rail stations.
Thank you very much. Can that be considered?
I'll come in on that. We certainly can do. I mean, certainly you're right. Castleford Station, it's been done a couple of years now since it was done. So there'll be some research there around how that's improved the perception of passengers. We'll be able to bring back, and on the other programmes as well as they come forward.
Lovely. I think Councillor Fair.
Just before you move on, Chair, as you all well know, because we've touched on it many times, with the TRU upgrade, all the stations, just about all the stations on the line from Leeds to Manchester will be improved. We had a presentation from Keckley, from TRU, and their full team, would you believe, last Wednesday, which all went very well, and where they illustrated what kind of works were going to be done, and probably going to take a decade. It's going to take 10 years to do this. But Murfield Station was mentioned, I think. I'm sure you had a word with the officers after after I left, because I did give members the opportunity to talk to TRU while they were there. So there's many things going to be happening in our part of the world. Disruptions, yeah, but ultimately it will be a great job, I'm sure.
So it's an investment long overdue, is it? Councillor Thompson, you wanted to briefly come back in?
Sorry, thank you. It's one thing I'd missed. The complete absence of bus information at the railway station here is something that's been raised. You get off the train, you have no idea where the buses are or where they go. So something that would be really helpful at some stage. Thank you.
It's all that modal shift, multimodal, what's it? We need to be given information.
And I think the project that's beginning to take shape at the rail station. Obviously, the buses have moved out from the front of the rail station. There is some signposting and things like that, but it is something we're chasing up with the project, because I don't think they've quite got that right yet.
Okay, so with that then, I think the report is for noting, but if we can just obviously, mindful of the previous item we had, if we can make sure that the next reiteration of this report includes passenger charter update, that would be really helpful. So I'm happy to recommend that Councillor Cahill will second it. All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. That is carried for noting. Thank you, Dave. You may leave. So the final item on the agenda is project approval, TCF Bradford Interchange Station Access. Is that you, Dave?
I'll just start on this very, very briefly. There's only one project approval on the papers here, although there's a number for noting that decisions have been made elsewhere. I'll draw your attention to. This is Bradford Interchange Station Access, which is going for outline business case approval. I'll bring in Jonathan Rogers, who's at the rear of the room there, to give an overview of the project.
Thanks, Dave. So I'm Jonathan Rogers, Programme Manager within Transforming Cities Fund for the Hubs and Interchanges scheme, of which Bradford Interchange is one. So I'm here just to give the brief background to the scheme first of all. So some of you may be aware, currently the ability of Bradford Interchange to act as a kind of key station gateway in its current state is limited by things such as its location behind other buildings, including the multi-storey car park on Horlings, current poor quality of the facilities, especially in the lower level concourse, and the access from areas such as Horlings, which should be improved, are currently actually acting as an impediment in some cases. So the scheme, which is obviously supported by other projects funded through Transforming Cities Fund in Bradford, aims to create a world-class vibrant gateway to Bradford that enables safe, seamless interchange between all transport modes, and aims to contribute towards the creation of a thriving city centre. So this is aiming to be delivered through improvements to the interchange's lower level concourse to make it easier to use and a more attractive and secure environment, benefiting those accessing both the bus and rail station and interchange between the two, and also inclusive of better cycle storage within the facility as well. There'll be clearer wayfinding and customer information to help users transfer in between the interchange. Externally, there'll be an attractive paved plaza area outside of the interchange with planting, artwork and seating to replace the kind of current congested taxi and drop-off areas, so it'll be a more welcoming pedestrian environment there. The new taxi rank and accessible drop-off will be moved onto Bridge Street. Obviously, as part of a previous approval for this, but within the scheme, there'll be the demolition of the Hallings multi-storey car park. And what that will do is create a new attractive landscape walkway between the interchange and Hallings. So it's giving pedestrians better access to the city centre, but also to the interchange itself, as well as cyclists as well on that area. So as I mentioned before, obviously the impact of that's really to create a vibrant station gateway to Bradford. So it's improving on the current situation. It's obviously a less visually appealing and accessible station and interchange, particularly as a first site for visitors to the city as well. The scheme's expected to contribute to driving up bus and rail passenger numbers and remove barriers, making it easier for people to walk or travel or by bike between the interchange and the city centre. It'll contribute to sort of wider efforts to make the Bradford city centre a safer and more welcoming and accessible place as well. The scheme introduces new green space also within the Hallings walkway. In terms of the approval sought today, it's a funding reclamation approval on of £2,054,127, which will take the scheme through outline business case and onto full business case and into delivery. Obviously, on top of that, there's been a previous approval at this committee, which was for the demolition of the NCP car park to go ahead and enabling works to commence on the site. So what we will see is as part of this approval, some enabling works commencing before full scheme construction approval, which will be later in the year. Obviously, that benefits towards a kind of fast-tracked programme for this scheme, particularly with the City of Culture 2025 deadline looming. So that's my bit covered in terms of the approval sought today and the scheme background. So.
Thank you. Councillor Rosshaw, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Obviously, just really pleased to see this moving forward. Prep works for our Transforming Cities programme are about to start across the city centre, actually. So obviously this is one element of the jigsaw, but we're pedestrianising Market Street and Hallings as well. So those works are all going to start to take place soon. And obviously we've got a very tight programme that we're confident we can deliver before UK City of Culture 2025 as well. So this will really kind of lay the groundwork for the future for Bradford, so really excited about that. And as mentioned, the interchange isn't the gateway it should be, and I think we sometimes say it's the perfect argument for why Bradford needs rail investment, because whenever we invite people from the government to see to come visit Bradford, that's the first impression they get as well, so we can kind of understand the argument we make quite quickly as well. So pleased that it's come forward, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments, questions? Councillor Bolt, Councillor Thompson.
Thanks. I welcome the report on this. Looking at the wider report, there's a number of references to active travel, Chair. So at this time, can I ask that the committee notes that Kit Allwinter has been heavily involved in a lot of this, will be leaving us, moving, as many officers seem to be doing, from the Combined Authority to Active Travel England, and that we thank him for his service and wish him well in the future.
That's irritating, isn't it? It's an unofficial view, obviously. But yes, that's obviously there's a real shortage of expertise in all areas of transport, isn't there, really? And we're all fighting over keeping people, and obviously we've got lots of schemes we want to do in West Yorkshire, and we do need the staff to be able to deliver those. Very good point, and obviously endorse what you say there, Councillor Bolt, about giving them our thanks. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Just one concern to raise 422 about potential detrimental impacts to accessibility. That's quite concerning. Seems rather odd to develop a scheme that could actually make accessibility worse. I'd really like to push for that to be addressed as far as possible, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Jonathan, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, thank you. Obviously through the scheme we're pushing Bradford Council as the project delivery partner to engage with accessibility and mobility groups around this. So prior engagement has taken place. with that, and we will continue. We've conditioned as part of the outline business case approval for that engagement to continue to take place. Obviously, the quality impact assessment has been undertaken with this scheme as well. So it's something that we will continue to look at and engage with Bradford, obviously, in terms of improving the kind of station for the interchange forecourt area. Obviously, it's aiming to pedestrianise it and make it actually more accessible from what's kind of a currently congested area. So I do appreciate that the geography of the situation is that the taxi and the drop-off area appears to be, moving further away from the entrance onto Bridge Street, but obviously incorporated within the wider points around this is aiming to actually improve the accessibility for pedestrian access by removing that kind of congested area in the front. But it's certainly a thank you for raising that, and it is something that we continue to engage with Bradford Council on, and they subsequently are engaging with those groups through the scheme development.
Councillor Rushshaw, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a really good point to make, and worth bearing in mind for the whole piece of transforming cities. I think there'll be a lot of improvements in this area, and I know taxi ranks, for instance, are being split up and moved around so they're in the most accessible points, and officers have been spending a lot of time considering how you have disability access in pedestrian areas, because the more you put within the zone, the more vehicle flow you have, but the more you have outside of it, the further away they can be from where they need to be. So I think it's probably a challenge a lot of cities are going to be facing as we move towards this kind of reshaping of our city centres in the future. But just to stress, as Jonathan says, we have been meeting with the groups in general. I think if you use the interchange and you think about that frontage, it doesn't feel very accessible in a sense. So although on paper it's probably moving slightly further away, by opening up the space it'll be less congested. As Jonathan says, it'll probably be a better experience. But obviously we want it to be within a reasonable threshold so that it's still accessible for people with those vulnerabilities and movement issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more comments, questions, Councillor Scullion?
Just to say, it's a project that's long overdue. Multi-storey car park coming towards the end of its life. Absolutely fantastic. Can we just get on and do it, please?
Yes, before the deadline as well, obviously, noting the timetable. Councillor Hayes.
Oh, thank you very much. Just on the accessibility, we've kind of been through it a lot at Leeds City Station and moving the bus, the taxi rank and things, and we're kind of, but as a mother of an autistic child and an auntie of an autistic young man, widening that space for those who are neurodivergent is much better. So it might be for physically worse for people who are challenged physically, but opening up that space and having clear lines for people who have neurodivergent conditions is much more welcome. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a debate about accessibility, isn't it, actually, about how we make it accessible for all and different things for different people. We need to be minded of all those things when we're developing these schemes, which obviously are going to be there for decades to come, aren't they? So we need to get it as right as possible. Any more comments, questions? No? Okay. Well, I'm happy to recommend that. Councillor Carroll seconded that. All those in favour, please show. Thank you, that is carried. There are other, obviously, schemes that have gone through the Combined Authority that are noted in the paper. Did you want to say anything about any of those, Dave?
Nothing in particular, actually. I'm happy to take any questions on them. It's also worth noting that in between, since the papers were published, there's also York Station Gateway has been given the approval as well, which you'll have seen through the press statements as well.
Congratulations, York. Lovely. Well, in that case, thank you very much, everybody, for attending this morning. The sun is out, so hopefully the snow is melting. Hopefully it'll be easier to get home than it was to get here this morning. So thank you very much, and see you at the next meeting. Bye-bye.